virtual panel discussion titled Commercial Real Estate Deflecting the COVID Curveball. Today's session, held in association with Nucleus Office Parks, will highlight the post COVID challenges faced by the commercial real estate sector, its untapped growth opportunities, and the emerging trends redefining the space. To understand this better, I have with me today a panel of eminent thought leaders. I'm very pleased to introduce our panel. Sigrid Zialsita, CEO of Asia Pacific Real Estate Association, Kaiser Pervez, CEO of Nucleus Office Parks, Vinod Matthews, Director, Global Real Estate and Facilities Group, Amazon, India, APAC, and ANZ, James Woodburn, Head of Real Estate Asia, WPP, Ram Chandani, MD, Advisory and Transactions of CBRE, Anuj Puri, Chairman of Anara Property Consultants, and Neetu Vasanta, Managing Director and Partner, BCG. A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. I would also like to request our audience to drop their queries in the comment section. I'm sure our experts will be happy to address the same. APRIA, as some of you might know, is a prominent pan-Asian trade group that champions the real estate assets industry across Asia Pacific. I'd like to invite Sigrid Zalsita to share some trends that APRIA has witnessed in the commercial real estate sector across Asia since the pandemic lockdown, work from home, and now with getting back to work. Sigrid will make the presentation for about 5-6 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and I wish you and your families a wonderful year of the Ox. Thank you, Mint, and also Nucleus Office Parks for this opportunity to kick off this evening's webcast. As a short background, APRIA promotes real estate and infrastructure as an asset class. And we are a voice for investor groups, including real estate investment trusts. So if we can start off with the first slide. Okay. All right. Can everybody see the slides? Okay. Perfect. All right. So can we move on to the next one, please? Next one. Thank you. All right. So over the next 3 slides, I'll be sharing with you the themes that we are expecting for this year. After a very soft end to 2020, we are already gearing up for an economic recovery around the world, which we expect to gain momentum throughout 2021. This will be supported by the vaccine rollout that we are seeing now in many places and continued support from the governments and central banks. So the main theme for the year is recovery. For Asia Pacific, the World Bank forecasts an annual growth of around 7.4% this year, and this will be led by a strong rebound in China. Headwinds still remain, definitely, but the region's recovery is expected to outpace the rest of the world, and this is estimated to be, our growth in the region is estimated to be up to 18 months ahead of the rest of the world. And in a world that's searching for growth, this alone will be instrumental in accelerating the investment into our region. Now, in terms of economic drivers, favorable demographics are the major catalyst. It's not the size alone, but the composition of the population that we have here that's quite important. By 2030, the working age population in Asia Pacific will have grown by around 165 million people. And that's a lot if we compare it with North America, which will only add around 3 million by 2030. And in Europe, there will be even a retreat. So this relatively young demographic we're seeing in fast-growing markets like India, this will be a linchpin. Now, looking at the implications of the commercial real estate, and that's what we're here for this evening, we are seeing a pickup in terms of leasing activity in the region. And that's because we're seeing also lockdowns ease pretty much across Asia Pacific. For the office sector, we have seen many returning to the office and also maintaining a hybrid setup. It depends on the market, of course, and I think our panel later on will be discussing that. Mainland China has been at the forefront of this recovery. They have been also ahead of us in terms of getting their economy back on track. We have also seen companies in India welcoming back their employees. Now, where is leasing demand coming from? And there are two sectors that are very important for Asia Pacific. First one being is on the technology side and financial sector. Now, here in Singapore, where I am based, the technology companies have been noted to be scaling up. And these are the likes of Amazon, Alibaba, and Lazada. They're inking leasing contracts or in advanced negotiations to expand their presence here in Singapore. And we do expect this trend, in terms of office using occupations to grow at an even more rapid rate in the next few years. And this is because we are expecting many countries to digitalize and enlarge the share of the service sector in their economies. Now, for retail, a resurgence in COVID 19 infections and continued tightening of social distancing measures are still exerting a negative impact on the brick and mortar retail. And with the shift to e-commerce changing fundamentally our shopping habits or behavior, retailers pretty much across Asia Pacific are focusing on refining their online offering, which is also encouraging landlords, and we're seeing a lot of them, to invest in prop tech. And that's because they want to enhance consumer experience. And as everyone knows, with e-commerce actually gaining momentum, this has also sustained the demand for logistics facilities. Now, for investor, what does this mean? Sentiment has also improved over the past year. Of course, it was down the first half, but things have improved, so we're seeing the sentiment go up with the ongoing recovery. And we've also been in talks with a lot of our members, predominantly who are investors in Asia Pacific. And we do expect a lot of them to start going back into action. So getting investment activity, I think, to gain momentum, I think, this year. In terms of pricing, we've seen some investors actually ask for discounts, but in reality, what we've seen is a resilience in prices pretty much in many of the commercial assets, with the exception, of course, of the hard hit sectors like retail and hotels. Now, in the case of office, I think there is a lot of positive momentum, as I've mentioned. Then we can expect also that the price to benefit from that and the volume as well to grow for this year. Now, can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, there are other reasons, two reasons I wanted to mention why we are expecting the regional economy to remain on a path to recovery. And the first reason I have here is the resurgence of REITs. 2020 or last year, we saw an acceleration of REITs across Asia Pacific. And we expect this to carry on this year. In India, we heard Brookfield, another REIT that was actually created. We're going to be seeing a lot more in the Philippines, in South Korea, and of course, China. China's REIT legislation was passed last year, and we do expect some REITs to be announced during the first quarter. Now, why is this important to all of you? By creating an additional source of funds for real estate players to tap on and redirect capital into domestic real estate and infrastructure, REITs are emerging to be very important tools in terms of sustaining real estate growth and also revitalizing the economies, especially as we fight this pandemic. Now, I'd like to end with the next slide. And this is actually very noteworthy reforms. We are seeing a lot of reforms in the regulatory framework, and they are proving to be a game changer across Asia Pacific. And why is this important? Policy support is creating a positive terrain for regional economic growth, and REITs are a main beneficiary of them. We're seeing, I think, the regulators, I think the last 2 days we've heard in India that they're easing restrictions when it comes to the debt being provided to REITs and InvITs. And that's very important. That will allow them to grow more. And let me just explain this why. Okay. Current REITs in India are focused on the office sector, and the information technology, or the ITES sector, contributes significantly to the Indian economy, and it is very important to have a sustainable real estate supporting this sector. So, additionally, Indian REITs could play a key role in jump-starting the economy and pave the way for a more transparent and liquid real estate market. And that would actually lead to continued development in urban cores. We need that. So it is very important that we work with the government. We in APRIO, we work with them hand in hand to make sure that we are able to have a landscape that's conducive for REITs, for the real estate sector, and be on par with the other countries across Asia, and for it to grow. So I'd like to end this, my short presentation, take a pause here, and hand these over to our moderator to kick off the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigrid. That was very insightful. So without further ado, let's jump right into the panel discussion. I would request the panelists to please switch on their cameras. So Kaizal, let me start with you. Nucleus Office Parks, of course, manages really large commercial spaces. Could you tell us a little bit about changing expectations of corporate tenants in the post-COVID era?
Yeah, so Madhurima, I'll take off from where Sigrid left. The resurgence is there, the recovery is there. There's no denying to the fact that the pandemic did put brakes on the India's expanding office market, but the green shoots are available for all of us to see. There is business activity which is sort of starting up. There's improved sentiment at the back of vaccine being available. The last quarter, particularly from a leasing activity, was a spurred up thing. Very large occupiers at the back of their very long-term plans are ready to make forward commitments. In fact, and I think the fact that most of the large landlords are also are in perfect position and have been ably supported, by offering flexibility. But amongst all of this whole traction, the central theme which we believe is the big transformation of office. And I think the capital O of office is really changing from where it used to be a place and a time to new services and behavior. What I really mean to say is offices is not just a building anymore. It's going to be an experience. And a lot more people will start realizing that, and larger occupiers are realizing that. In fact, in most of our conversations, we see most of the mature occupiers have already laying a lot of emphasis on health, wellness, safety. In fact, the whole idea of premiumness of the building will not get defined by rents alone, but particularly what kind of an importance you attach to the health standards. Secondly, I think amenities, and in most cases, experiential workplaces will just not be an expectation, but largely an obligation of the landlords. So in a massive way, I think amenitizing building will be a responsibility of the landlords. And last but not the least, I'm not sure. I think the debate is on whether the market will continue to expand the way it expanded in 2019 and so on. But what is definitely certain is the fact that the occupiers will continue to seek better spaces, if not more spaces. Probably the lack of fixed spaces will get increased in a corresponding increase in terms of collaborative spaces, but I think the occupiers are becoming far more discerning. And as a whole, the choice for lifestyle workplaces will become a big driver.
Sure. Ram, I would like to ask you the same question. You engage with a number of occupiers and corporate tenants across cities. Are expectations changing? What are you witnessing?
Taking off from what Kaiser actually said, I think the way we live and work is going to really change the future of how real estate will be transformed. I would say there are 10 key elements that would really affect the way occupiers look at space, how developers look at space. I think the partnership between CRE, HR, and IT from an organization's perspective is just going to strengthen. How do we define workplace performances will change? Healthier buildings and operation will take a center stage, and that's the key. Employees will expect and demand elbow room for sure. Desk sharing occupancies will strategize and continue to grow. Space allocations will move away from we space and me space, and there's always a deliberation between we space and me space. That's going to be re-looked at when you look at your environments that you create for your employees. Amenities and strategies that will focus around hospitality and services in the office environment. That's really going to be, again, a very, very important aspects to attract your occupiers back. Conferencing and adapt of mixed presence collaboration, and collaboration taking it to a very different level. Remote working is here to stay. It's not that it's going to go away, and it will depend from organization to organization. But the office is very much here to stay. So, in a sum up, these 10 key themes are going to be the focus going forward.
Sure, sure. So that sort of brings me to the next question, and I'll go to you, and then James. What are the current areas, and what are the current challenges that you think the commercial real estate sector has to address? As we sort of resurface from the COVID-led crisis, and with people coming back to work.
Okay, so I think this is a difficult question to give a precise answer, as these are unprecedented times. I hope, like the 2000 and 2008 downturns, we recover faster. But one thing this crisis has done is it has changed the way people have worked in past. There's a dichotomy in operating fundamentals amongst the property types itself. On one side, we have the industrial, real estate, logistics, healthcare, data center, or even cell towers have positively been disrupted. On the other side, we have offices, hotels, and physical retail. We have felt the negative effects. So we have to remember that the pandemic has resulted in a significant shift in the way people live, work, play. And this has put a unique pressure on our certain property sectors. So while the return will be deliberate, and I think especially in certain property types, I think two important areas which our sector has to focus. First, I think Ram did briefly mention in multiple elements, which is technology transformation. Now, you just take a step back. In a matter of weeks, most of our workforce moved to remote working. Speaking about our own function, property tours started virtual, tenant communication converted into online channels. Most of the technology which was required to manage day-to-day operations started evolving much faster. Companies increased their use on cloud-based collaboration and to lower the overall cost of technology, and thereby increasing the flexibility. So technology is something which will be much more deeply entrenched in the corporate real estate side. The second important aspect, which I strongly believe and Parvez did speak about, is the customer experience. Our sector has a great opportunity to use this time to upscale the offering and services. We've been growing at such a rapid pace, and most of the places we've been catching up on either on quality or timely delivery. And with green shoots on future, global players are looking to open up their centers in India. Customers are getting more picky and looking at raising the bar with each new acquisition of the space. So it would be, for me, technology transformation and customer experience.
Sure. James, would you like to share your perspective on the same? What are the various things that the sector needs to address as people come back?
Sure. Look, it's been an amazing global experience, social experiment to see this all unfold on the universe at once at the same time. Different responses all around the region. I know we're focusing on India, but it's quite fascinating to see the region and completely different responses, largely driven either by the home situation and how you can work in that environment, the technology that you have in place, the commutes you have, which particularly for India has had a play on it, and your job role. So we're expecting a lot more from the owner's side, a lot more focus on touchless experience throughout the workplace. So in all the toilets, everything touchless, doors that you don't have to touch. The standard for lifts will be swipe your card and go into destination lifts. So certainly when we were hearing about REITs, that brings more sophistication and better quality in time. So that will be the pathway of the future. We expect to see a lot safer and wellness-focused buildings. Air quality will be a big focus for users to make sure that the filtration systems are second to none. Temperature checks standard throughout buildings. Tracing and communication networks. We've all talked at the moment about the experience, and certainly we're actually opening we opened one major campus in Mumbai last year, and we're in the middle of COVID and opening our Gurgaon campus. So we're literally planning on how we're going back. And one of the key things is an experience app that not only deals with communications and COVID and health and safety, but just deals with the environment and bookings. So we've spent 10 years, when I think about it, trying to get everybody to work agilely and remotely. And the positive side of this is we've got this turned around overnight. So it's very, it's exciting in some regards that it's been this trigger, albeit quite difficult. But I would say, as one observation is, whilst the office is critical because we're social beings, and so we need that collaboration and so on, we don't need as much space as we needed before. And we do need more collaborative and so on. So I think we'll see a softening for a while before we return to growth. It's definitely there as a need, but we need less of it. We need to be smarter with it.
That's very interesting, James. Neetu, if I may ask you, that going forward, what are the various things you think, corporate occupiers or occupiers in general, will look for in their office spaces?
Thanks, Madhurima. I think Ram, James, Vinod all have touched upon it. Future occupants, that while there is a whole talk and this whole wave about, work from home, which is a trend which is quite real, but the occupants who are going back to office are also demanding a lot of facilities and a lot of creative spaces in order to make the office ready for the new way of working. So, at one end, they want more flexibility in terms of contractual obligations, but let me keep that aside. Just if I focus on the layout, the architecture, and the technology needs that the occupants will have, that will be, much more, they'll be much more demanding. So what do I mean by that? If I think in terms of layout design, they need something which we're calling as a 6 feet office. So, unique design concepts that use physical as well as visual design tools in order to enforce social distancing. So, barriers between the desks is, one petty example of that. The second trend, which is, quite a buzzword in office space these days, is called de-densification. So the same space, the number of desks that we used to fit into every office is now becoming lesser and lesser because, people need to put sanitization stations. There are certain norms in terms of social distancing. The number of chairs you would put in conference rooms is much less. So people need a lot of flexibility to move this around in order to make the office more efficient and effective, but also have the social distancing. That's just in terms of layout. But now if I think in terms of architecture, we're going in the reverse direction of an open office design. We are reverting back to deep working chambers, closed rooms that, allow for isolation. We are talking about contactless pathways. We also need a lot of UV light optimization, coming in for help prevent against the virus growth. I think the other thing that most of the panelists touched upon is just the introduction of technology into the office spaces. We are looking at voice-enabled elevators. We're looking at elevators that can be activated with a smartphone. We are even looking at introducing, health surveillance technology that is now very commonly used in airports and malls. A lot of, offices are considering temperature screening, etc. Air filtration system is one, very, very crucial and critical need that all the offices are talking about. So I would say that, whether it is in terms of layout, architecture, or technology, there is a lot of demand on the new developers.
Sure. Anuj, if I may ask you, you've been around for so long, and right from the time when probably India's office market started sort of booming. I wanted to ask you what has changed, given what we have gone through in the past few months. Do you think there has been a reset in the expectations of occupiers? We want to share your views on that.
Nice to speak with you, Madhurima. Thank you very much for having us on the panel. Haven't interacted with you in a few weeks' time, so nice to be here. I think, Madhurima, I'll start with this. It might be stormy now, but rain doesn't last forever. But I'm really pleased with all the panelists' comments, because the comments that they made are not here temporary. I mean, it is not because they were saying it is pandemic and it is going to go away and we're going to go back to the habits that we had. I mean, I was very attentively listening to all the panelists, and they made beautiful points. And so many a times that we think is that is it storm today and it's rainy today, this is going to go away, are we going to go back to where we were in terms of our habits on the pre-COVID level? I think some of the things we will go back, but I think all the points that were mentioned by the previous panelist, I think we're not going to go back to any of those points, and they're superbly well articulated points. I think it has been said enough. I'll only say 3 or 4 points, which I'll just highlight because the previous panelists have already touched upon it, Madhurima. I feel is, from the time that we started getting into this business, Madhurima, it was all about how do we densify the building more? How do we get in more people? I think it is going to be de-densification that people would really want. It is going to be about, safety. It is going to be sanitization, hygiene. It is going to be about providing the right amenities in the building. Kaiser said the right thing is rent is going to be important, but that is not only going to be the factor. It is going to be how do you provide experiential workplace, to the occupiers. It is going to be about about grade A workspaces. I think, Madhurima, gone are the days, when we used to look at this Connaught Place buildings, the old buildings in Nariman Point. I think it is going to be very difficult to be able to lease out those buildings. And even after the pandemic, we're not going to go back, to that stature or class of buildings. Clearly, safety is going to be very paramount from the occupiers' side, and whatever needs to be done to make these staff feel safe, whether it is technology through touchless mechanism or voice based mechanism, that will need to come in here. And my guess is that the occupiers will continue to gravitate towards more mature developers, more mature owners of the buildings who will continue to invest in their assets and be able to provide that safety, security, hygiene, sanitation, flexibility of space for these occupiers. And that is where I think the trend is going to move in. I don't think this is a reversible trend that you're going to find.
Sure. James, if I may ask you, given that you are you're in the creative and advertising industry where you need a lot of people collaboration, how are you looking at sort of bouncing back to pre-COVID days? What are organizations like yours doing to bring back the office culture, or the collaboration that is so at the center of workspaces?
Sure. So when it all first hit us, we had to really pivot quite quickly and find a way to continue operating and continue collaborating, but in this vastly remote at-home environment. And I think from all of us, the most common platforms were Zoom and Teams, and we had a number of other collaboration tools that would enable you to whiteboard and so on. And as an organisation, credit to the management leading it, there was a lot of communication and decks put together on how to manage teams remotely, how to keep in touch with them, how to motivate them, and to keep sort of that remote management, which none of us have been doing in the past. So it was very responsive and quick to do that. Some of our countries have got straight back into the office and have reverted to normal. And I think in some regards, they've lost an opportunity to embed long-term positive change. In India, we haven't. We're getting close to starting to move back, but it will be a very gradual and managed return to office. In India, probably the biggest outside factor, which is out of the control, is the commute, because the commute is where the compression is, and that is the thing that bothers people. I think they're very comfortable when they're getting back into the office and there's less people in there, less density and so on, because we're managing the levels. So we'll be getting people back to normal and hoping to bounce back to the old normal, but with this flexibility of managing levels of density, but not by way of changing the design so much of the space, but by managing the amount of people working in the office and having a spread. Because we're certainly studying everybody, and the unanimous vote in most countries is we like flexibility. And in India, because of the huge commute times, a lot of the staff are actually enjoying having 3 extra hours in the day, 1 for themselves and 2 to be a bit more productive. And we're seeing that in Japan as well and Australia, but then, as I said, in other countries, they're virtually back to 100%. So I do see it as a great opportunity in India to grab the balance and seize it.
Sure. Ram, I wanted to ask you, as we sort of, emerge, from the pandemic, now that the pandemic is over, what is your outlook on the commercial office market, and where do you think it is heading towards?
I think India has always been a large offshoring outsourcing hub, and the talent base in India continues to grow. And that's one of the reasons why you see large corporations around the world really come and set up operations over here, the GCCs, the GICs, the offshoring centers with Indian companies growing, and with companies like TCS, etc., taking the lion's share, being one of the largest outsourcing firms. So you will see that growth continuing from an India perspective. And obviously the West has taken a while, and if you look at the numbers of cases, whether it's in Europe or the Americas, are way, way higher than what we're experiencing in India right now. And whether you call it a herd situation where we've recovered in some shape or form, I think we're way, way better off. And if you look at our sectors, the front office sectors, I would say, have seen a quicker recovery for us in India already. So your banking, your insurance, all of those sectors have already seen a lot more people get back to work. I would say close to 50% or more back in the office. And as organizations go through their strategies of bringing back people to work. The IT sector obviously has been much slower because of the flexibility given. Obviously, organizations are evaluating, not that organizations haven't brought back people. And you've got to keep in mind that the delivery centers, and while a lot of organizations made bold statements about moving to a larger remote working environment in the next 5 years, etc., I think they are grappling. The Indian situation, you got to keep the Indian situation very clearly in mind. While you do have a lot of young talent from tier 2, tier 3 cities coming into tier 1 cities for the other opportunities. And a lot of them actually, with the fear of the pandemic, have gone back to their hometowns and have been able to deliver. But I think the challenge for most organizations to be able to keep up that pace of delivery, the fatigue is already built in. And if you ask business leaders today, and that's the biggest challenge that the business leaders and the managers are facing, of getting delivery done, which is happening remotely. You have to make big investments in technology if you want to really grow and put a larger percentage of people from a remote working, or actually more, I would say, work from anywhere, which will be the future. It's not just work from home. But I think very importantly, you have to have the labor consideration, which is your people consideration. You have to look at location, because location will matter. And you'll see clients look at occupiers, look at a combination of hub and spoke and strategies of tier 1, tier 2 cities in the longer term play, depending from business to business and sector to sector. You'll also look at your overall occupancy strategy, where you'll want to build in flexibility because occupiers will want developer partners to say, can I look at 50% or 60% of my portfolio convention, and what can you give me as a flexible solution in XYZ locations? And that's the real play for institutional developers, to be able to really provide that overall strategy, that partnership, that leadership relationship between the occupier and the landlord or the developer, to be able to really curate that strategy for them. And over the last year or so, we've been working with a lot of occupiers on their long-term strategies. And this is really what is panning out.
Just to ask a quick follow-up question, Ram, we know that you mentioned IT companies and you mentioned GICs. I mean, a chunk of occupiers and leasing in India is, attributed to ITS companies. Do you think it's a little premature, or do you think that will slightly change? Because IT companies, as we know, especially the multinational companies, are not in a hurry to come back to work. So do you think that the customer profile in terms of IT companies will change a bit going forward?
That strategies on evaluating long-term strategies will get tweaked. As I said, your portfolio strategies will evolve, keeping in mind labor, where your people are coming from. How do you make sure you create attractive environments to get your people back? And as I mentioned, the challenges in India for people to work from home are spoken in multiple sessions over the last year, and I don't want to get into that. But the key for us and for the occupiers is to be able to get that delivery to happen, right? While the GICs will create, and if it's a captive unit, the strategy has been very different. If it's not a captive unit, the strategies are very different. As I said, you'll create additional elbow room. You look at where your people are coming from. You will really create the amenities in your environment to continue to attract. A lot of the young people actually lived off their offices. They got into the office to have breakfast, lunch, and evening snack, and maybe dinner. And actually literally went back home to sleep or lived in a shared accommodation. So that's going to continue to seek employment, right?
Sure.
And that change will continue to transform as the year goes by with the settling down of the pandemic and with the vaccination program in play. You will see that. And each organization, depending on how mature they are, will create that strategy that best suits them. But we've already seen a lot of clients who first said they would look at mid-year or closer to September, actually from a return to work, have already started talking about coming back and looking at March and April and already planning for that. So that's a positive move. And if you look at occupancy in most of the business parks across India, we did a survey and we already seen that numbers increase from last year to this year. So that's very positive. Of course, the tech sector occupies about 40% of the overall absorption in India. That number hasn't changed from last year. And you're seeing some big pre-commitments because, as I always say, absorption is a factor of where these deals get signed and occupied in that year. But you're seeing so many large pre-commitments across India for larger environments, larger campuses, with not just the tech sector, the financial sector, the large consulting organizations have grown. Engineering and manufacturing, their back offices and shared services centers are growing in India. So huge growth for us. And of course, the flexible work environment, the operators have again gained share in the overall absorption. So overall, all these sectors are really seeing that jump.
Sure. Sure. Kaiser, if I may sort of, taking on from what Ram said, we've seen over the last, 8 to 10 months that, there are, two kinds of employees primarily that have emerged. One who's sort of got comfortable with the whole, work from home regime. And then you obviously have employees who are happy to get back. So I wanted to ask you that what is your sense in terms of ramp up in office usage, and also when do you think will be going back to the pre-COVID level?
Madhurima, I think the debate on work from home is been on for the last few quarters, and I think there is no substantial data saying that work from home is going to here to stay or lead to a decreased fixed desk space and so on. But I think what's important is that nobody can deny the fact that offices are essential to create and build organizations, and especially when technically at the back of a very amazing budget, we are in the growth decade and so on. I think offices will continue to be the flavor. With that being said, I think the fact that we have the vaccine around the corner, there is a rollout happening at varying stages in different countries. One broad estimate says that most of the developed nations will probably be 30% vaccinated by Q1, and a majority of the developed nation will probably 60 to 70% will get vaccinated by Q2. That basically means that about 40% of the world population hopefully should have herd immunity by Q3 of 2021. My sense, and just corroborating to what Ram as well said, is the fact that over the past few months, definitely the office occupancy has been swelling. It did not swell as much in the last quarters, but definitely in January onwards, particularly in the more commercial space, we have seen people coming back to offices. And I think it's also going to be a big function of public transport being available. Particularly in the case of Mumbai, despite the fact that if the 30% ceiling had to move to a 50% ceiling, but if the local transport did not really move or operationalize, people would not come. So if and when the local transport and the public transport is available, my sense is that more and more people should be available. Just to give you a statistics, I think most of this quarter will continue with an average occupancy of less than 50% in the country. Probably we could extend that to H1 2021, but beyond that period of time, I definitely expect to reach to 70 to 80% of the pre-COVID levels.
Sure, Kaiser. Anuj, if I may ask you, the whole workplace culture or how people work and where they go to work is very closely, interlinked with the residential sector. And I wanted to ask you, as the way we work change, and there's a lot said about larger offices or offices away from city centers, so to speak. Do you think things like or themes like living near office or communities around offices or walking to office among others, how will these play out in India?
It's a very good question, Madhurima. There are 4 or 5 things that we are seeing as a trend. One is the demand for townships is on a rise. And, James also alluded to this, particularly for India, that commute is a challenge. And, that remains a big thing for the workforce. And hence, they're looking at more township spaces where they have offices, hospitality, retail, school, residential. So it's a more sort of controlled environment. That's the first thing that we're seeing. Second, interestingly, Madhurima, we're seeing, need for larger spaces on homes. You remember we've been discussing that, the homes in India are getting smaller. They're actually, in this pandemic, at least every guy is saying, I need half a room more for my office. So instead of 2 bedroom, the demand is 2.5 bedroom. Instead of 3 bedrooms, the demand is 3.5 bedroom. With that half a room, they are wanting it more because they can use it for the office. Third, interestingly, weekend home sale has jumped so high because I think Ram mentioned it. Work from anywhere is coming in. So really, from their perspective, they believe is that we'll continue to work 4 days a week in the office. We'll come in, and I absolutely agree with Kaiser and Ram that I don't think so offices are going to go away. But their thought is that we'll probably work 4 days a week, and then go off to the weekend home, and we'll work 1 day from there. I mean, again, I think James mentioned it that you're giving 3 additional hours. 1 hour they're keeping to themselves, and 2 they're putting it back to work. So the productivity hasn't really hampered as much. That's the third thing that we are seeing. The fourth we're seeing is that many of the spaces which were rented, the tenants are moving away from the CBD residential more closer to their offices, either in suburbs or on the periphery, because these large IT parks were on the periphery or the suburb. They want to be more closer rather than being in the CBD where they previously wanted this to be. Clearly, that also has propped up demand in tier 2, tier 3 cities because many of these have gone home, and for a longer duration they've been working there. So demand in the tier 2, tier 3 has gone up. Last thing that we're seeing is that in the newer developments, the guys are asking for better facilities which are more related with workspace. So in the club, for example, they want the right resilience of internet, infrastructure, reprographics, ability to be able to really use that clubhouse from an office environment point of view. And that is where we are seeing the change in the demand from the residential due to this pandemic.
Sure. Vinod, if I may go back to you, you did touch upon technology and the role of technology, the way in which offices are designed. I wanted to ask you, what is the role that you think technological innovation will play in boosting the growth of, the commercial real estate sector going forward?
Yeah, I strongly believe in times to come, tenants and end users are likely to leverage space more on experiential value rather than just on traditional metrics, such as cost per square feet or sales per square feet. And to achieve this, they definitely need to piggy ride on the technology. And I think unlike the prior emphasis just on location, health and safety and smart building features would be the ones which people would be looking more. And an important role in leasing will also be defined based on how much the landlords are able to, or developers are able to look from this lens. Operators have to shift their mindset actually to align how tenants place their strategic bets on their own CRE investments by using technology and data at every step of decision making. Developers have to increase the value of their properties, and I've heard previous panelists speaking about deploying smart building design, maintenance capabilities, offering more relevant services to the tenants and end users. The services can be a lot of IoT based sensor technology. Predictive analytics is now a lot of is the in thing. People are talking about why should we wait and be reactive? How can we make sure that we are ahead of the curve? Offering preemptive and usage-driven maintenance rather than a standard age-old way of doing things. In the design part, there are a lot of 3D visualizations which are helping landlords to assess operational readiness of their physical spaces in real time. So all in all, it's not just at the developer side, it is also even in the interiors or FM side where people are looking more, how are different ways of cleaning things? How do we actually know whether the work which we have designed under the new protocols are actually happening? The quality of indoor air quality, HVAC systems are all these important aspects which have now become a C-suite leaders have started focusing on it. So I think it's a combination of every aspect which we were probably not focusing enough, but now all these things are coming on fore.
Sure. Neetu, I wanted to ask you, we were briefly discussing in the course of the discussion on perhaps the changing profile of corporate occupiers, if at all. According to you, what are the new sunshine industries, in the post-COVID era? Occupiers, new age companies, perhaps, that would drive sort of, leasing going forward.
Thanks. So I still think that the bulk of the portfolio is going to be ITES. I think our fundamentals for that sector are so strong. We shell out 2 million, English speaking STEM graduates every year, which is like the highest in the world. And our cost per employee in that space is like 1/10 of the developed countries. So, the 45% of our leasing space, in my opinion, is still going to go ahead and be with the ITES space. But if I think about the new sectors and the new trends that we're evolving, one, everything related to healthcare, whether you look at diagnostic centers, whether you look at, fitness run companies, whether you look at health insurance, whether you think about vitamin companies, anything and everything to do with healthcare is a big trend, and every, subsector in that domain is just growing. So I think that is going to be one key phenomena. I think the second most interesting one is the e-retail. So the micro delivery, the milk baskets, the grocers of the world, they have got on the consumer, on the convenience bit, and now the consumer is hooked. So something that was a necessity during the lockdown has now become a habit. I meet people, I meet friends who now would never go to a grocery store to buy. They just like to click the buttons on their phone, and that's it. And that's a trend that's here to stay. So the micro delivery e-retails, that's the other segment which is here to grow. I think the other important one is edtech. We've seen a lot of chatter, we've seen a lot of growth. Again, it's a combination of, we spoke about many trends, right? Transport in India is painful, and people want their kids to get exposed to as many things as possible, and still make their lives convenient. And edtech is a platform that's delivering that. So if I were to pick, 3 sectors that would drive the growth, it would definitely be healthcare and related services. It would be the e-retail format, and it would be edtech.
Sure. Ram, if I can ask you, despite the pandemic, in 2020, we've seen, billion-dollar deals in India's commercial office sector. We've seen, one REIT right in the middle of the pandemic. We have an ongoing REIT right now. I wanted to ask you that, when large global investors sort of, place their faith in the office sector, does that in some way, will it also sort of, incentivize occupiers, to think long term, because investors are clearly thinking long term. Do you think investments will continue, and do you think that will also, in some way, sort of, influence multinational occupiers, particularly in the long term?
Occupiers have always been comfortable with institutional players. And if you've looked at earlier, the funding patterns in India where strata sell to your investors, and then a mature developer would attract a tenant and manage that entire leasing and asset management of the building. I think the occupiers want the comfort that a large developer who's their partner is going to be controlling their destiny in some shape or form when they occupy buildings. And all the more reason in today's day and age, post the COVID era, where the expectation of the occupier is to create a healthier environment, to make sure that the occupier is getting what the developer is committing, and the financial wherewithal is really coming in from institutional players. And the non-institutional players, there are all the large families that own real estate in India. It's pretty much a family-run show. And if you look at all of them, in some shape or form, they have an institutional partner, whether it's an equity partner, whether they're talking of REITs in the future, all of that is in play. And a lot of the comfort that an occupier gets with an institutional player is very different from what he will get from an individual landlord. But in the last year, most of the institutional players were not being very flexible, while the individual landlords in some cases have been a lot more flexible in terms of giving them breaks. And that's what our occupier clients have shared with us when we did our last survey. So it's a balance. And if you look at the commercial sector, it's moving more on the institutional play and larger developers with that play. On the industrial side, again, you're seeing that trend move. Retail again is moving to that trend. So I think eventually it's going to be a large institutional play, and not that the smaller investors are going to disappear. And the opportunity for smaller investors to invest in the real estate play is through the REITs platform. So I think that's a big opportunity for individual investors to be part of this growth sector and still play an important role. And of course, you can't ignore the HNIs who want to also own a stake in the entire real estate sector, and huge investments have happened through HNIs. I think there is enough play for them too, because the hub and spoke models are here to stay, apart from the larger tech park environments. To Neetu's point, actually, on transport, I think the cost of transport is going to go up in these times, because as you get people in, the number of people that you want to put in a cab is going to be a big factor. And obviously the labor laws and what the government really lays out will also impact on, because today you will have an employee registered in, say, Bangalore, but he's gone back to his hometown, say in Chennai or in Tamil Nadu somewhere, or Kerala or anywhere else. So I think labor laws will also have an impact going forward in some shape or form.
Sure.
The play from the developers, the institutional play is very much going to be there, and large occupiers. End of the day, if a large occupier like, say, Vinod is looking at a build to suit, he wants to make sure that the developer criteria is clear in terms of financial capability to deliver, to be able to have no legal issues on land, and to be able to sustain and maintain that facility for him, right? Three simple criteria. There are many more criteria, but I'm just naming three simple criteria. So these are going to be important factors going forward. Not that they haven't been in play. They've always been in play, but it's going to be all the more important now.
Sure. Kaiser, if I may ask you, what are your sort of three top strategic priorities in 2021?
I think, Madhurima, the way we look at it at Nucleus Office Park, I think, by virtue of the fact that we manage large buildings, we want to get into a position where we manage buildings of choice. And there'll be many things which will go into makings of buildings of choice. Be it amenities, we spoke about air quality, heightened standards of health, safety, and wellness. So, genuinely creating buildings of choice where rents are not determining how premium the buildings are and how great the buildings are, but generally the amenities and what you offer as value within the buildings are really actually determining the choice. The second big agenda, for us is technology. Now, traditionally, we've been talking about technology. There is real estate, which is a big sector, but if you really look at it, technology penetration in real estate and more particularly in property management is very, very. And I think of all the many things, COVID has taught us that technology over the next near to short term will really define how people interact with real estate. And I think it will be a big, big determinant in the way you probably look at people's temperature, in the way how clients talk to you now. I think gone are the days where people just going to correspond on emails. Right? So I think technology adaptation will be a second big thing. And I think the third and the most important one, and we've always been maintaining it, is the tenant engagement. Essentially, in the next 3 to 5 years, as Ram said, majority of the buildings will be institutionally owned. Each building will be great. Each building will have amenities. Each building will have the value-added services. I think what will really define is how strong is your tenant engagement. And I think you can't turn your eye from the fact that your tenant engagement will become the differentiator for you, and I think how you foster relationship with it will actually mean growth. So I think these are the three big things for us.
Just a quick question. I'm curious to know that when you speak to occupiers, particularly in this pandemic kind of a time, do you think going forward, the Mumbai, Bangalore, NCR will these still remain the top three locations in terms of office occupancy, or do you think because of people working from anywhere, occupiers too would look at a slightly more spread out, office usage going forward.
Sorry, Madhurima, whom are you asking the question?
Sorry, I was asking Kaiser the same question.
Kaiser. Okay. Kaiser, go ahead.
No, so I think absolutely. I think and I think Neetu also alluded to that. Given the fact that 40 to 45% of the demand will continue to be from the ITES and that whole belt of South India, Bangalore, forward commitments and so on, I think will continue to be the drivers. But what is also important to see is the other corridors or really the commercial corridors of Mumbai and Delhi will continue to have the same kind of sheen because, as I said, at the back of the budget, we believe that this is going to be a growth decade. Industries will flourish. There is going to be resurgence. Whether it happens in the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, the vote is going to be out. But eventually, these 3-4 main cities will continue to be the beneficiary for a very significant leasing traction.
Sure. Thanks.
Just to add what
Yes,
Kaiser
please.
said, obviously we're seeing a lot of occupiers look at centers across India, whether it's in Bangalore or Delhi. And the 3 largest office markets in India actually have been Bangalore, Delhi, and NCR. I would say NCR, it's not just Delhi alone. And actually Hyderabad, followed by Mumbai, Chennai, Pune, etc. But we're seeing a niche categories of clients, industries and creating those little hubs there. So if you look at Pune, we've seen a lot of engineering and R&D happening there. Chennai historically was all about the banking financial services back office with Citi and Stancy setting up in the early days. If you look at Bangalore, it was predominantly R&D, Noida R&D hub. So each location based on its talent pool are looking at those little hubs. And obviously when an organization looks at a location strategy, they factor in talent, which is the big key factor of availability of those skilled talent for them to bring in those jobs in that specific micro location. And of course, infrastructure will play a large role going forward. Public transport in the future and how that pans out. Integrated developments, as Anuj mentioned, have always been a play over the last few years, have been a big attractor. So I think all these factors, but the key is talent. Without talent, there's nothing.
Sure. I think we have some time to take some audience questions, if I may. We have a question from Tarun Muduganti, who's asking that if remote working, if with remote working becoming a key part of occupiers' strategy, will the supply of real estate be more, in the near to mid-term for offices? So I think basically the question is about, will if there is a slight shrinking in demand, will the supply sort of exceed demand? Ram, would you want to take that?
If you look at actually 2019, I'll give you 19 because 20 was, it's a year that we really wouldn't want to count. We came off a high of 65 million square feet gross absorption in 2019. And if you look at the strategies that were adopted, we didn't have quality grade A supply in relevant micro markets. So we're coming off a year where you had lack of quality relevant supply in key micro markets that were desirable by corporate occupiers. And that's why India has seen so much of pre-commitments for corporate occupiers who were expanding, consolidating. So most of the markets really had a shortfall of grade A quality supply. And that still continues today. Developers, while they have built speculative space, the quantum of speculative space that was being built post the global financial crisis has got corrected.
Yeah.
So even now, you have a shortfall of quality, relevant grade A quality supply.
I'm happy to add to that.
Sorry, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, because many businesses out here have struggled with revenues in this past year. We all haven't had the Amazon run with the digitisation and has grown and grown. There's been a lot of pressure on revenues. So I think it's fair to say that many businesses are looking to be smarter with their footprint and reduce it. Ram's spot on that there is always a shortage of high quality, and there will be an increasing demand for improved quality, and this health focus will drive that and so on. But I think there is a bit of a resetting. Offices aren't going anywhere. They're definitely needed because we're social beings. So it's not the death of the office, but there's in general a real reset and an ability to be smarter and more efficient with that footprint. Globally, though, I would say that our businesses outside of India around the world are actually still looking at India as that back office and bringing more resources. So again, accelerating the outsourcing. So I think India itself is in still quite a privileged position, but the improvement of quality is something that hopefully the REITs will continue to accelerate.
Yeah. If I may just add one point, I think if I look at the top 6 cities, Bangalore, MMR as well as Delhi NCR is going to be slightly different, and Delhi Gurgaon I'm including, than Noida, Hyderabad and Chennai. And the reason why I say this is picking up from where Ram left off, there was each of these cities had different levels of finished grade A inventory at the end of 2019. So if I look at a Bangalore, if I look at select micro markets of Delhi and Gurgaon, there is still a shortage of quality grade A supply. And in fact, in Bangalore in Q3, we also saw a slight price trending, which was the biggest shocker if I look at just commercial real estate. So I think if I look at these 3 cities, we are definitely we're not going over the top in terms of inventory. However, if I look at Noida, Chennai, and bits of Hyderabad, we already do have some existing inventory. So the case is going to worsen when we go forward, at least in the short term. And the only other point I would add to that is, while the demand slowed down, the supply also did slow down for a couple of months. So, the construction projects also got delayed. So somewhere, both of them are also getting balanced hand in hand.
Sure. Neetu, I just, so somebody is asking on basically space or basically rent, and what is the sort of projection of rental rates going forward, and is it going to come down because there may be sort of a situation of oversupply in certain markets? So what do you say? Yeah,
I'm happy to just start this one off. I think again that will depend on the kind of market there is. While there is a demand for lesser space, and very few offices are vacating their spaces, I think it's important to keep in context what part of the cost is rental cost. So if I take an ITES sector, the total cost that they spend on the rental space is 2 to 3%. So it's really not top of mind agenda to vacate office spaces. That's not their key priority. People, office occupiers are spending a lot of attention on making sure the offices are comfortable for people to get back. So, people don't want to make the quickest buck. Developers are also being very smart. They don't want price dilution, so they are allowing for rent-free periods. They're saying that, let me give you 3 months for free, but let me not get locked into a contract that takes down my pricing by, 7 to 8%, because that has to sustain for a long time. So, grade A developers are, being creative about it. I think if I think about a Bangalore, Delhi or MMR, I don't see the pricing structurally coming down. In fact, the last 5-6 years, if you look at the commercial grade A real estate space, it has been growing by 15%. Of this, 5 to 6% is volume driven. The other, 8 to 10% has been pricing led. So I think that will shrink a bit. But I think if I look at a Bangalore, Bombay or an NCR, it will still see a price trend of 5 to 6% post the correction. The other markets, I think it will take about a year to get back, and then the price trending will happen.
There is another question, on whether de-densification will de-densification set off the remote working percentage of employees, and hence the demand is more or less the same. Ram, would you want to take that one? So basically, I think what he's asking is, will de-densification and remote working on the other hand, sort of balance out the demand and supply this thing to a certain extent?
Sure, it really depends from organization to organization because larger, I would say, KPO, BPO setups had very different configurations of linear workspaces and collab spaces. The larger R&D tech environments had very different ratios, going up to almost 300 square feet per person. So it really depends from organization to organization. But as I said, as one of the key 10 points, the employees will demand for additional elbow room, no doubt about it. So de-densification for organizations who are providing you that 2x5 workstation will obviously be there, for sure, no doubt. And that will offset the quantum of remote working or work from anywhere policies that the organization puts in place to really make that happen. But also very importantly, what developers will have to do is to really be able to design buildings where you bring in flexibility for the layouts to get reconfigured. So occupiers will have to look at probably raised floors where they can reconfigure workspaces. The partitions are not going to be fixed partitions. I'm just touching in some of those elements. So when an occupier is really designing his future space, will want to create that flexibility, and developers will design buildings to cater to some of that flexibility needs going forward.
And if they don't, we'll build the
Yes.
raised flooring and so on. I think to your point, the de-densification will soften the downward pressure on rents, because for those who aren't profiting out of COVID at the moment, there is that pressure. So we're looking to cut space or be more efficient or reduce needs, and it might be a while for the general run-of-the-mill businesses to come back to growth and to be saying, I want another 20,000 square feet. That is not a conversation for our business and probably lots of others, albeit I acknowledge that there are some that are ballooning out of this, but on balance, most are struggling and trying to reduce. But the depth of decline is certainly being insulated because of the de-densification. So it's the balance. The home working sort of will take the pressure off rather than people saying, I'm de-densifying, so I need an extra 20% of space. That's not likely to happen.
So also, Pandurima, very importantly, the scale and size of each building, right? If you are building a 500,000 square feet building versus a 2 million square feet tower, to complete a 2 million square feet tower, the risks of those larger blocks of space and not having a tenant or having only part commitment is again a challenge for developers. And in some cities where the FAR is phenomenally higher than most parts of India, developers will have to look at strategies on how they complete the buildings if they have a commitment for only part of the building. These are some strategies which are being looked at by developers going forward, because there are situations where that's happening as we speak.
Sure. There's one question on, what is your outlook on tier 2 cities? I think you touched upon it, but if you or anyone else in the panel could throw some light on that.
Sure. We've always seen tier 2 cities as, if you look at the tier 2 story actually started off 10 years ago. And there was a huge wave that the tier 2 cities will see substantial demand for larger corporations to go and set up. We've seen most of the offshore outsourced companies, more of the outsourced players really go in there, catering to domestic demand, whereas some of the companies have really gone there for cost and talent reasons. If you look at in South India, when you look at Trivandrum, Kochi, you look at Salem, Madurai, some people would not think of even putting a center in Dehradun or Jaipur. But you've seen large corporations go to Jaipur, Dehradun, Lucknow for a domestic setup. And if you look at Bhubaneswar is a big hub for a lot of outsourcing companies. So tier 2 has always been a strategy, and it's again purely talent driven. Again, depends from organization to organization. And if you look at the post-global financial crisis, some of the peripheral areas in a tier 1 city were offering similar rentals as tier 2 cities. So obviously the tier 2 story didn't take off the way it was supposed to take off. And the attraction for an employee was, I want to come to a tier 1, I want to be where I have an opportunity to be part of the headquarter location of sorts, and not in the smaller setup. But there are companies who are only headquartered in some of the tier 2 cities, which is a big thing. And the sort of being able to look at opportunities beyond the organization they work for in a tier 1 cities, and the quality of life in a tier 1 city, a lot of the younger people aspire to come in here, and that's why you didn't really see the tier 2 cities take off the way they're supposed to take off. But not that we haven't seen growth there, but it's a very marginal percentage. It's much smaller compared to what you see in tier 1 cities.
There's an interesting question I would request Kaiser to respond. The question is, what percentage of businesses would you see, going forward, who would ask for an upgrade in their existing offices? What tech-enabled, if possible. And from the current one, which was built a few years back and cannot be upgraded. Basically, I think he's asking, will there be businesses and companies who will ask for an upgrade in their offices? And what happens to those where buildings or office parks that cannot be upgraded?
I don't think that there will be specific requests to upgrade, but I think the way we look at it, I think the upgrades will really be an obligation on the part of the landlords to drive new business. Given the fact that new businesses and new occupier and then new expectations will be centered around new health, safety norms, new amenities, technology, and so on. So for you to be in the game and for you to be a building of choice, you actually don't have a choice but to upgrade. And I think traditionally the other way to also look at it, but most of the institutional landlords such as ourselves traditionally want to own the building, fix the building for the first 1-2 years, and sort of fixing the building is the most important aspect in our whole strategy. Right? And the way we look at this is that upgrades is not going to be incidental. It's only COVID that now people will and the occupiers are going to be asking about it, and that's the new expectation. Right? But to our mind, it is not going to be a specific kind of an occupier who will seek this. To our mind, this will be a rather unanimous request from the occupiers, and the fact that for you to be staying in business, this is what you have to.
Madhurima, just to add that,
Yeah, sure.
if you look at the sector has seen real growth in the last 30 years, and more so in the last 20 years. And some of the buildings are outdated in some shape or form. They don't meet fire code if required, the new fire norms that are out there. The elevators, the air conditioning systems are outdated. So it's a no-brainer. If you want to attract a quality tenant, you will have to upgrade. And obviously developers have realized that, and that's already been in play over the last few years. It's not just because of COVID that you came, but the enhancements from a COVID perspective will have to be done by all developers to attract and retain tenants.
Sure. So I think that brings us to the end of this discussion. Thanks again to all our speakers for joining us today, and a special shout out to Nucleus Office Parks for partnering with us for this series. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.